Hello, and welcome to FI for Kids, a podcast about guiding your kids on the path to financial independence and extraordinary lives. I'm your host, Dominic DeLaquil. Our guest today is Dr. Renée Baker. Renée is an award-winning entrepreneur, a professor at the University of South Florida, host of the Unleashed Life podcast, and a dedicated community advocate and philanthropist who fervently believes in building financial literacy and wealth for all. Welcome, Renée, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Dominic. This topic is so important, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here.
So let's start with just talking about what you learned about money when you were a kid, whether that was direct conversations that you had with your parents and your family, or it was just things you picked up on from observation.
Yes, I love this question because it centers on those early money lessons. And what's interesting is when people think about money education, they'll usually say, okay, there's this formal lesson of a budget and a piggy bank, but that wasn't my story. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about it. It wasn't something that we had discussions about. It wasn't even something, Dominic, that I would even think to know about. All I knew is that I would watch TV. I saw all the money and all the rich people on TV, and money to me just meant rich. Like if you had money, you were rich. Lifestyles of the rich and famous, if you remember that. I do, for those that are listening. Dominic, you're probably too young for
And
that.
no, I remember.
But we saw people on TV, and I thought it was money was for everyone else. And I would, talk about all the luxury that I would see on TV. And the thing that I knew for sure that I learned from my family was that money did not grow on trees. And all I wanted to know, well, where does it grow? I'm from a small town in South Jersey, and if it didn't grow on trees, where is it at? I'm trying to find the soil, right? So we didn't have those conversations, and it wasn't until later when I went into college, and I majored in finance, right? So complete shift that the curtain finally started to lift, and I started to understand more about how money worked beyond just the earning, but investing, savings, and building.
Yeah, okay. So what drew you to finance then? Just the idea of you didn't you didn't talk about money when you were a kid. Now, what was the sense of money in your house? Let me back up again. I'm asking too many questions at the same time, but so when you were younger and you were growing up, you didn't talk about money, but what was your sense of money? It seemed fine, you didn't think about it much? Did it seem scarce? What was the vibe in the house?
Money was complicated. It was one of those things that, we had love, we had family, and we had a sense of community from the town that I'm in. But I grew up in a house where we had to make a dollar out of 15 cents. And I always say that joke is because we knew how to budget early, even if we didn't call it that. And I say it was complicated because it was more of an act of maybe survival and not really understanding the mechanics of how money worked. We always hear sometimes that we didn't feel poor, but I didn't know what I didn't know. We definitely were resourceful, right? We didn't talk about it, but I always say we lived the lessons of money and the sacrifice, the creativity. How are you going to make this dollar stretch? How are you going to make this meal stretch? And the discipline, because I like to say discipline because I learned how to put to the side what it is that I wanted. And I knew that if it wasn't readily available, then we'd have to prepare for it. Right. So as I got older, I started to realize that money had been like an invisible force in our lives, and it shaped what we could actively say yes to, but more often than not, what we had to say no to. So it wasn't about a feeling, it was more of this weird, complicated thing that was there but wasn't. And when it came down to it, it was really about lack of exposure and access, right? You don't know what you don't
Yeah.
know. And so you don't talk about what you don't
Hmm.
know. But the reality is, um, we just didn't talk about it. And what I also ultimately realized from viewing the people who had money or had luxury at that time, that they move through life with a little bit more
Yeah.
ease and a lot more power. So when we don't talk about money, I would say you don't miss out on dollars. You also miss out on dreams because you start having this scarcity, thinking more about what's not possible than what is.
Yeah, so you bring up actually two really good points from what you just described. So the first thing I was thinking is, that idea, that discipline that you learned, right? From having to be judicious and careful and make decisions about the resources that you had as a family when you were a kid. That's a really powerful and important lesson because we all need to do that. But then the danger there is kind of what you finished with, which is then that's important, but then you can get stuck there and you can get stuck in a scarcity mindset. And that's a great way to put it, that then it then really limits your dreams or what you might be able to accomplish or do in your life because you just don't think that that's ever going to be you. And then that's a real problem. So it's important to learn that discipline lesson, but also be able to dream and be expansive and not limit yourself just in your own head.
Yeah, right. And I'm so glad that you said that because when you have those formative thought processes, right? And you start to think about, oh, well, what can I do? That's such a limiting mindset. I didn't know that at the time, right? But the discipline was necessary because it taught me to be careful with money.
Yes.
It taught me how to prioritize. It taught me to stretch a dollar and it built a level of wisdom and resilience that I wouldn't trade.
Yeah.
And those foundational lessons, when you flip the mindset that shaped it, it really taught me to manage what I had with excellence. So I was a little bit more prudent and smart about when I did earn money. But on the flip side of that, if you're not careful about having this survival mindset, it becomes the default.
Yeah.
And you start shrinking, and then the budget starts feeling like lack, and you're shrinking your vision, you're shrinking your joys, you're shrinking your dreams
Yes.
because you've internalized this idea that there's never going to be enough.
Right. Right.
And I had to unlearn that and be careful about my mindset because I didn't want to live with the fear of it. Um, but in the same token, I didn't want to cancel out the discipline. So I had to learn how they can coexist,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense because really I think that's the key, right? I mean, so my situation was different, not so much in terms of the money. I mean, I had depression era parents, and so they were always very careful with money, but I was the youngest of five. And so we didn't talk about it a lot. And we were careful about money, and I knew that they budgeted, but that was something that they did. And I had no problem dreaming big, but I always just thought, well, yeah, it'll work out. And so, but what I didn't learn when I was younger was the discipline. So my path has been the opposite, in that I didn't have to learn how to let myself be expansive in my thinking. I had to learn the discipline. And I made all of the classic, financial mistakes and had a bunch of unsecured credit card debt. And, I could earn money, but I couldn't keep it. Right. And so I had to learn it from the opposite end as you. But ultimately, we all have to combine them both. Right? Because what good does it do you to have the discipline and have some money? But then if you can't use it as a tool to help you have a better life and do more of the things that really matter to you, then what good does it do you? But then at the other time, if you can't earn it or keep it or make it grow for you, and you're always stressed about money no matter how much you have, then that's no good either. So you've got to combine them both. So yeah, what you're saying makes perfect sense. I mean, I think that's the essence of financial independence.
Yeah, and I love that you're saying that it's that balance that
Yes.
matters, right? Because dreaming without discipline also is frustration. We like to say it's Delulu, but it could be frustration. Discipline without dreaming is limitation. So, like you said, we need both, and we have to believe to some extent. We need to know what to do with it, but we also have to believe that we deserve it enough to keep going, right?
Yes.
Because that limitation, that scarcity mindset holds us back because like I said earlier, we start thinking about what we can't have. And then when we get it, we're just trying to grab and do all the things because we're not accustomed to having it. So I think that is a really good point to be able to balance both, and finding that right balance does matter.
So I want to come back around to that and head in kind of to the next level within a second. But before I do that, since we started off talking about what you learned about money growing up, and I know you have kids and they're all adults now, so I want to just take a couple minutes and talk about what you taught them about money when they were growing up, and then how maybe you're still helping them now as adults.
Yeah, so I have three adult daughters. And what I really appreciate about them, I always say they are the best case study about why it's so important to teach kids about money. And one of my greatest joys is also seeing how they move through the world very different financially because we had conversations about money in our house. And what we did was Finance Fridays. And we also tucked those lessons into everyday life because I didn't want money to be a taboo topic. I didn't want them to ever feel like there wasn't enough, but even I didn't know it at the time. And so Dominic, as much as it sounds great, if the listeners out there like, wow, you had this plan. No, it just happened to become that way. I didn't know what was happening at the time, but I wanted them to be comfortable about talking about the things that sometimes were uncomfortable, making decisions, asking questions, and thinking more long term. And I see the fruits of that now. My children, they're adults and they don't like to be called kids, but they are my
Mm-hmm.
kids. They're generous, they're thoughtful, they're not driven by material things. They value their time, they value their freedom and their legacy. They invest and they save and they give. And I said, you know what? It's never about really being perfect because there's always progress and there's a continuous learning that place takes place, but they have awareness. That's something that I didn't have. And one of the things that my dad said later in life, he didn't say that when I was younger, but I've adopted it, is, money don't own you. Don't let money own you. Learn to own it. And I found that to be profound, especially coming from my dad when we wouldn't even talk about money. But that's what the girls, that's how they embrace it. And watching them and their relationship with money today is just so powerful and is very touching. Also, you think they're not listening, and they would huff and puff and like, oh boy, here we go. But we didn't make it like a formal lesson. I'm an educator at my heart, but we didn't make it about a formal lesson. We just would talk about it. And listen, not for nothing, they made mistakes, and I don't want to pick on my oldest, but she set the tone for how the rest of the two other ones had to have conversations around credit card debt when she was buying out Applebee's for her friends. And I hope that she hears this so she knows I'll never forget it. But it did help us have another conversation about the importance of managing debt and the importance of understanding our choice and our decisions. And that is something that's really powerful. The other thing that I would add when it comes to the girls, and I want to share a quick story. Our oldest daughter recently got married, and having three girls and thinking, okay, listen, we know that we're going to pay for a wedding. What's it going to be? But one thing that I really appreciated is that when she came to us and said that she was getting married and she was planning the wedding, she decided to focus really on the marriage and not she didn't want a big thing. She wanted the money to be able to invest in another home. So she wanted that money for an investment because she was thinking about it long term. She did not want to have a wedding of her dreams, but her wedding of her dreams was small and it was intimate and it was about the people that mattered. And that to me, for us, is an example of how there's this generational ripple that starts with the conversations that we have. And those are the seeds. When my mother said that money doesn't grow on trees, I can now say I found the soil and we planted new seeds because now we're growing into another generation that is going to see money differently and their kids are going to see money differently, and generationally, I think we'll see a ripple effect. So it's just an important conversation, and I'm not going to say I knew everything, but that's the pressure that we put on ourselves. We don't have to know everything. We just have to start.
Yeah, no, that's great. A couple things in there I really like. I really like your analogy of a ripple effect. That's just so cool. And just, the idea of, well, also just the idea, and this comes up all the time, but it's so important to talk about money, right? And, still, even, I think it's getting better, but for so long, it was, unless you came from wealth somehow, right? Anything from the middle class or even the working poor, like it's just, you don't talk about money. And that's, I think, been a huge mistake, right? So, but then that's how you start planting seeds in that soil, right? So your girls were comfortable talking about money. I mean, again, I laugh because like anybody who's had kids knows that, like, you get the eye roll and they're like, but I think you make another good point is that, but still they're listening and they pick up more than it seems like they're getting from the attitude they might give you at the time. And as a parent, you have to trust that you're, well, back to your analogy, right? You're planting seeds and those things are going to take root in the long run. And you just have to have faith that that's going to sort of work out. Not everything, and they're going to make mistakes, right? Like you talked about with your oldest daughter, but it's also better that they make those mistakes when they're younger. And it's so important that you've already established this relationship with them and this habit of talking about money. So now they're not trying to keep it quiet. They're not afraid to talk about it so that you can discuss it with them and help them sooner, help them find whatever resources they need or the knowledge they need, or help them, encourage them with the habits or changes that they need to make to get out of whatever mistakes they make with money. And the sooner they do it, the better. And then that example with what your daughter wants from her wedding is she wants the money to invest so that they can put that towards a house. Is that right? Is that how you said it? Yeah, that's very cool, right? Because financial independence, you can't separate out the money nuts and bolts pieces from knowing yourself and what you value, right? Because ultimately, back to where you started, you've got to make choices. We all have to make choices about our money. And it's not that you shouldn't spend money, but you should spend it on things that really bring you joy and value in your life. And then you can not spend so much on the other things. And so it's super cool that your daughter has figured that out and she's making choices that are going to bring her joy, and she's not sacrificing, but at the same time, she's being smart with her money. So then she's combining things, which is really, that's extraordinarily cool. You must be super proud.
I'm over here nodding because she absolutely redeemed herself from the Applebee's incident. And it's a really special place to be, that she's not living in fear and she's not letting money control her. And we say that all the time with all the girls. We have to make decisions that are aligned in life, right? And that's no different than with money. And I find that when you're not talking about money, you're creating this, like, it's taboo, and it doesn't create the confidence to go. And joy and wisdom can coexist, but not when you have fear and scarcity, because it also becomes afraid. And to your point, I also want my girls to know that at any time, if something gets broken, that we'll figure out how to fix it, because it's not really about you won't make mistakes. It's progress before perfection. But what I also wanted them always to know, that we don't talk, it's not about restriction. It's more about intention. So the goal isn't just to manage money, it's to master a mindset that has us to be able to live fully and intentionally around the things that matter to us in our core. And I just think that that's just a good way to just live and have a great life.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think that's really well put, that it's not about restriction, it's about intention. Right. I think that's exactly right. And I also like what you said about, wisdom and joy can coexist, but not if they're not in the presence of anxiety and fear. So I think those are really great things. So, Don, did you talk about these kind of things when you did Financial Fridays, or were you talking more about practical things, or a little bit of both?
It was a little bit of both. So Finance Fridays could be whatever was happening during that week. And then at the time, I'm working in finance, and sometimes it could be an interesting article that was in the Wall Street Journal. And part of them getting their diction and being strong about speaking was also reading articles to us and kind of interpreting it. And I don't know if this is a bad thing. My youngest daughter reminded me that when they would be on punishment for something, they would have to write about it and then share, right, the lesson. that they learned, right? So they're really good about taking information and breaking it down, and public speaking, by the way. But the other part of it is we would talk about things. It could be about budget. It could be about a credit card. It could be about something that was happening in the news. But it was really about making sure that it was relatable to what was happening in life. Because we don't walk around, I mean, I'm in finance, so that's a different conversation, but we don't walk around talking about, oh, let's talk about credit card debt today. But we can talk about the implications of when we swipe the card, what it means. Wealth wasn't a big conversation because, like you said earlier, it was only limited to a certain few, or that's what it felt like. But we can talk about value and what did wealth mean to us. We could say, hey, if you had $1,000 to spend, what would you do with it with no rules, right? So it started to encourage and prompt some really interesting conversation, because we also have to remember too that financial education isn't only about the dollars, it's also about the identity of money. And when we teach our kids how to learn, how to save and how to earn and how to budget, we also want to teach them the alignment of it within their values, which you spoke about earlier. And I think that is also an important part of those conversations about Finance Fridays, that is so much more than the dollars, because we don't all want the same things, but we can also live very comfortably and for ourselves if we understand the alignment of it.
Yeah. Today's episode is sponsored by Slingshot, a Singleton Foundation program. Slingshot is a free web app that makes it easy for anyone to create and launch a business idea. It guides you through the process of creating and clarifying your concept, then leads you into areas necessary for any business, such as identifying your target customers, working up your financial plan, your marketing plan, and more. It'll help you seek funding, or even if you don't want to start your own business, you could also use Slingshot to work up the details to help your current employer solve a problem or start something new within an organization that you might already be working for. You can find Slingshot at slingshot.io. I'll put a link for that in the show notes. And thanks to Slingshot and the Singleton Foundation for sponsoring today's episode. Yeah. How old were they when you started doing that with them?
Probably, so the oldest was probably, she started earlier. So as they started trickling in, we started it. But with the oldest, she probably was about 5. But I was a young parent, so I didn't know what I didn't know either. And it just started with probably like her just asking a question about money, and just me kind of going into it because I was studying at the time and really just introducing it. So it just became a natural flow of conversation. And some of the best conversations that we have now are about money. We talk about their salaries. We talk about their benefits. We talk about our salaries. We talk about how much money we make. There's no secrets when it comes to money conversations here, because we want them to be keenly aware of what is and what's possible, but we kind of fold that into everything. So yeah, we started at probably around 5 for the oldest. So that meant that but that didn't mean that as the oldest, the youngest was probably younger. So she probably was like 1, but we just talked about it. I mean, she probably was like 3 months old, the little one, and I'm just talking about money. I definitely talk to my kids I just talk to them like regular people.
Yeah.
Like I didn't use baby talk. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's cool, right? So then it's just, and I think you make me aware of what I think is a good point for people. So you were studying finance and you have a background in finance, but you don't have to have that as your professional focus to talk to your kids about money. It's not, I'm sure when your oldest was 5, you weren't talking about heavy details about
Derivatives and hedge funds.
Right. No, because that doesn't mean anything to them anyway, even if you were trying to talk about it. You've got to learn the basics first, right? So, and anybody can do that. I think the important thing is, and even if you're a parent and you're new to learning about money yourself, then that's a perfect opportunity to loop your kids into that conversation and learn about it together. So whatever your knowledge base is and whatever point as a parent you might be in your journey towards understanding and learning about money, just get your kids into that, involve them in it. And do it together. You don't have to be a financial professional to do that.
You don't, and that's the point, right? And that keeps people from having the conversation. But it's the simple transactions. You want to go get some ice cream, you have $2. Let's talk about what that means. And you're teaching your kids about money, and you're teaching them about math, you're teaching them about decision making. So you don't have to go into this whole process of like, I understand money and I'm a finance professional. No, we're always learning. All you really need is the intention, like you said. You need to be willing to have the conversation. And I don't know, I love learning with my kids, and they ask really inquisitive questions, and that kind of stretched me too. So I think that that's a really powerful lesson, like you said, is, hey, I'm learning this too, let's figure it out together. That's not weakness. I think that's
Yeah.
leadership. And I always tell parents, start small. Start small, but start. You don't have to be, like you said, a financial expert to have financially savvy kids. You just have to have the conversation and start and keep showing up.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Great advice. So let's transition a little bit. And I want to talk about your concept of the unleashed life. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, and because it wraps in so much to sort of all the things we're talking about, but let's dive into that a little bit. So what does that mean to you, the idea of an unleashed life?
Yeah, so usually whenever I say unleash, depending on who I'm speaking to, they just think that this just you're just out of control. You're just what a bull in a china shop. But it's a thread that ties this whole lifestyle together. So for to me, living an unleashed life is being free from limitations that were never really yours to carry, and some of that is in fear, it's doubt, it's generational pressure, it's even outdated definitions of success, and it does include money. It ties it together because you're shedding these expectations that keep you small, that you can begin to live with intention and courage and joy. So you're unleashing yourself from all of these things that hold you back. And one of the ways that is deeply connected to money, if you really understand it or not, or I'm gonna flip it, when money is misunderstood, right, or misused, it becomes a leash. It locks you in. It can dictate your decisions. It'll cloud your confidence, and it'll convince you, like we were talking about early, to settle and show up smaller and smaller and smaller. But when you start to understand it and you start to break the chains that bind you financially, you begin to take ownership of your life financially. And it becomes a tool, and it doesn't tether you to these misconceptions about money. So, and to sum it up, the unleashed life is about alignment, and it's about designing a life that fits you, not the version that people expect or applaud. And if you're bold enough to unleash yourself from that and you define it for yourself, it will bring you so much alignment and so much joy. And I've experienced it myself. And it never was about, perfection. It's about really giving yourself permission. And that permission is to be all of who you are without apology. And it doesn't mean that you're perfect. It doesn't mean that you have it all figured out. It just means that you stepped into choosing to live the life that you want. And sometimes you have to work through that. And I found that when you step into that power, it really becomes to unleash you in a way that you can't imagine. And it's different for all of
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. That's a good point because it is always different, right? So, what people are interested in, what their dreams are, or what really matters to them, or as they become adults and they get into relationships and then they've got to combine that with their partner in some way, all of those things. And so it's a different vision, and it's a different financial puzzle on how to get there and support all of that for everybody. So I think that's really important, that there's no one set way. I mean, there are certain principles that are going to apply, right?
Right. Exactly.
But how you go about making your vision come into reality, how you go about pursuing your unleashed life is unique for everybody. So, but that's freeing though, also in a way, right? Like you're not trying to follow a certain path. You're going to take certain principles and information and figure out how to apply those best for you in your life so that you're living your unleashed life that's full of joy and potential and opportunities.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. That is the key point that I always remind people of. There is no one size fits all blueprint for life. And that's the same in the definition with money either. There are principles, there are things that we can apply, and the blueprint is there, but we get to choose our own adventure in it. Some people choose well, some people don't. But I always say, when I made the decision to leave corporate, right, I made the decision to do that because I wanted more. And it doesn't mean that that was less. It just means I wanted something differently. And for the folks that are in corporate, that doesn't mean that that's bad. That's what they choose. And what lights one person up might not light the next one up. So I always just remind people, like when we're talking about money, that is personal.
Yeah.
This is a very personal decision. There are universal principles, like you said, but the things that I spend money on are going to be different than the things you spend money on. The things that bring you joy are going to be different for you and me. So the unleashed life is really about honoring that and not chase somebody else's vision for what success looks like, and get crystal clear on what it is that you want. And I also kind of center that in abundance, because I always say also that abundance is not about having it all. It's about having what matters most and knowing how to sustain it for you.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's really well put, Renee. I really like that. And it comes up often, and I think everybody knows this, although a lot of people still do it, right? That people shouldn't be trying to compete with the neighbors, because my neighbors have this, that, or the other stuff, and I've got to have this stuff. That's got nothing to do with, financial independence or an unleashed life or having a meaningful, joyful life. At the same time, right. I think, and I hadn't thought about this before, but there's also, back to this idea of there's no one right path. You decided to leave the corporate world and go into entrepreneurship. And we're going to talk about that in a second, but that's a path that's not for everybody, right? Being in entrepreneurship takes a certain type of personality, and you've got to have a certain risk tolerance, and it's a very creative endeavor, right? I mean, people think of entrepreneurship as business, and you don't typically think of that as being creative like you would with art or music or literature, but I would argue it's every bit as much creative. You're just channeling that creative energy into a business venture. But that's not for everybody, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with working in the corporate environment, so long as you're in a place where you're happy and it's fulfilling your needs. If it's helping you get to whatever your financial goals are, and you're then able to sort of live the life that you want to live, that's perfectly appropriate. Again, we're back to each individual's got to make that best determination for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's really hard for some people to wrap their head around for some reason. In some cases, people always feel like it has to be a or.
Yeah.
I can't do this or that. But what if we lived in a world of and? We can choose. We have choice. I can choose to really appreciate all of the wonderful things that corporate life did for me. And I can appreciate that. And I can pursue my vision. And I can change my mind. If this path, it's my path. I can create it. And if you live in scarcity, you'll say, oh, you can never come back. You can never be. But I promise you this. I wish that I knew what I knew now when it came to entrepreneurship, because I actually think that everybody in business should try to be an entrepreneur at least once. It changed my mindset even around business, because entrepreneur is business, like you said, but it's also creativity, and it is artistry. It gives you have a vision. You got to be resilient. Yep. You're building something from an idea, a calling, or a conviction. Life is still lifing. And like you said, it is not for everybody. And it is not as glamorous as everyone says that it is, although there's glamorous components in everything, right? There were less glamorous components in corporate. There were less glamorous components in entrepreneurship. But no matter what, do what you are called to do. And knowing that I wasn't afraid to make the jump also gives me a sense of understanding and accomplishment. And knowing that, you know what, I can take an idea and execute on it. I mean, how powerful is that? You can choose a path.
You bring that into reality, right? It's just in your head. That's what I mean about it's creative. And you made this vision of yours in your head a thing in the world. Like it's cool, man. If you've got that bug, there's nothing like it.
It's nothing
Yeah.
like it. And if you can get excited about something, and for me, it was like it was a calling. And there's so many reasons why I chose this path, and none, all of them honor who I am and what I'm becoming and what I want to give to the world. But man, this is pretty cool if it's for you. And if it's not, that is okay. But I don't live in a world of or. I live in a world of and I'm constantly building on that through the work and how I show up in the world. And that is my choice. And I honor that every
Yeah.
day.
Well, and I think the genius of the is as how I've heard it put before, right? In a different context, but I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind because you bring up, you also bring up the idea of everybody who's involved in business in some way would benefit from spending some time doing at least some entrepreneurship. What's cool now is with all of the technology that's available to us is if you can pursue entrepreneurship in a limited small way and get a taste of it with minimal risk while you keep your corporate job somewhere so you can do and then if you
And
might decide, okay, this isn't for me, this entrepreneurship thing, but all right, but you could explore it with minimal risk and that's okay. Or you might decide, no, this is actually really cool, I need to figure out how to do more of this. And you can do both. And you can shift your emphasis for a while and then shift it back. Like you're not locked into anything. So I think you bring up some really great points.
yeah, you're not locked in. And I know the world is crazy. And it's not lost on me that people are losing jobs and there's a lot going on. But I'll tell you that I believe that entrepreneurship is sort of a mindset. And I had a side hustle for years, right? So it's not like I just woke up one day and said, I'm going all in. I'm crazy enough to do it though, but I didn't. But I just love that you said like the genius of the end, because whether or not it's unleashed or whether or not you're an entrepreneur or corporate or you're a parent and pursue your passions and we could all benefit from just having a perspective of the possibilities and what is available to us, and we can test it out. But just don't, one of the things I just say, just do something that lights you up. We don't have to just live and exist in this with this one precious life, so limited that we don't see that the possibility. And every time I get in my head about this, Dominic, I think about we live in a world with people, and I still can choose. And I also can choose that if I can't find a job here, I can find a job somewhere. It might not be what I want, but there's a possibility. And a lot of those early life lessons and the way my mindset shifts helps me continue to show up in the world that way and optimizing and pivoting my life to be able to do the thing that's possible and having the courage to explore it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think as parents, right, then we would also want to, and part of the purpose of this show is to help parents start to set their kids up so that they can do the same thing, right? So that they're trying to help them, prepare them in terms of knowing themselves, but also understanding money enough to provide the resources that they need to have more opportunities so that they can pursue whatever it is in life that's going to bring them joy and also provide meaning. And so talking about providing meaning and talking about these different things out there, I want to then transition into, because you spend a lot of time and are heavily involved with nonprofit organizations. And that's very much, giving back. And I think that's one of the things that you don't have to be financially independent to do that, and you can work in that world, and those things are great. But if that's not the route that you go, but if you can reach financial independence at an age younger than traditional retirement, if then you want to really then channel your energies into nonprofit things because that matters to you, then you don't have to worry about the financial part of it. Oh, I'm making less money if I'm working for a nonprofit. You have the opportunity to do those things that really matter to you. But I think there's so much value to giving back to the world, giving back to and participating in communities. So just talk about how you got into that world and why it means so much to you, and how you think it benefits, that we can help guide our kids and nudge our kids in that direction as well.
Yes, I really enjoy the nonprofit space. And I enjoy it as a volunteer. I enjoy it as a philanthropist. But the reality is, when I started doing nonprofit work, it was really also, we started like with the kids when they were younger. Like we wanted them to see the value of what they had, right? And that was also part of their money lessons too, because they had to see the both sides, right? And you sometimes kids, well, at least I'll speak for mine, I can speak for all. Sometimes they forget how fortunate they
Yeah.
are. And because they lived in a very different, they grew up very differently than me and my husband, they will forget it. So I wanted them to see that nonprofit, be involved and give back and give their time and see the other part. That's a core value of mine, is the mentorships, the give of service, to be of service. So I've been heavily involved in organizations, especially when it comes to supporting women in education and financial empowerment. And like you said, we weren't millionaires, we just wanted to give back, and we wanted to give back, and we wanted to give back from the heart, and we wanted to teach our kids the importance of community, and we wanted them to understand that you don't, this is another scarcity lesson. Just because I give to you, that doesn't mean it's taking so much from
Yeah.
me. And sometimes, taking that financial is like, well, if I give it to you, I'm going to have less. And we wanted them not to have that. And when you have that financial foundation for whatever it is, it allows you to give, to serve, and to show up consistently without sacrificing your own stability. And that's the kind of legacy that I want to leave. I want to leave one, wealth, but more importantly, of impact. So that is why I continue to show up. When I left corporate, where, in corporate, we are very involved in nonprofit, and being an executive, it was part of the job and responsibility. But for me, is a part of how I live, is a part of my values. So I continue to be involved when I left corporate, because I just think that it is, I believe in community impact, and I believe giving into the communities where we work, live, and play. And I also believe in something that's beyond me. And that comes to the impact. And, not to get into, my belief system spiritually or from a religious standpoint, but I also just believe that to whom much is given, much is required. So we started that early with giving the kids for the holidays, giving back into the communities, going to volunteer to homeless shelters and give back to food. And still, that's just a part of how I am now. But one thing I'll say, another benefit and nod to the girls, is that one of them started a scholarship for her high school early. Like she started it with just a couple $100, but it was meaningful. So I just think that, we raise our kids to be independent and interdependent. So they need to know their worth, but they also need to know the power of service. And that is just a part of who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. And it's cool that you involved them early. And so, because I just think there's so much benefit to that for all of us, right? Because it's not, I mean, whoever you're helping, whatever organizations you're involved with, you're providing value to them, but you're also getting something out of it yourself, right? And the same thing with your girls. And I think that's true for all of us. So I think that's really important. And I think that's really cool that you've just done that for so long, and then, right. And taught that to your girls as part of everything else you were teaching them, both about themselves and about money and all of those things. And I like how you put that. Again, you've put a lot of things, really quite well today. You have a lot of really good points and a lot of good way of phrasing things, right? So you want them to be independent, but also interdependent, because so much of life is, it's not one or the other, it's combining things. So that's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That means a lot, because, when as a parent, when you have a full-time job and you have kids and life, you don't have time.
Yeah.
I didn't have time. So I had to like, okay, how can I do this? And remember, I live and how can I do both? And okay, I guess the kids, they're gonna have to go with us. And just understanding that giving back is never a one-way exchange, like you said. You are, when you're supporting others, you're growing, learning, and then sometimes you're healing, right? So always remember what truly matters, and it keeps you really grounded. No matter how much money you have, no matter how much money you accumulate. And I just think you just grow up with a more empathetic heart, more purpose driven. And yeah, so I truly believe that for me as a core value. And like you said, I think what I pulled away from what you said is that giving back doesn't take away from you, but it multiplies what's already within
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all very cool. Any final thoughts or advice for parents that have kids still at home and they're new to the journey of trying to teach their kids about money? Any thoughts around any of that?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, just start, just start the conversation, when you're a kid and when there's a conversation like, oh, we can't do that. And it becomes this constriction, like, we can't. Just start. Don't wait until you have it all figured out. I just don't believe that in life. You don't need to have a finance degree. You just need to have real, authentic conversations, and you need to be willing. So you start with the basics, you start where you're at, and even better, I think it's even better when you can learn
Mm.
together. And we have so many tools today that we didn't have in the early 90s when I was starting these conversations. But don't be afraid to connect it to the world more broadly. Don't be afraid to connect it to the world because the goal for me, and this is what I'll tell parents, and this is what I always say, the goal isn't also only about financial literacy. It's about financial confidence and give yourself grace too, because they're going to make mistakes, you're going to make mistakes, and that is okay. But let me sum it up with start small, start where you're at, and be consistent. And if you don't teach your children about money today, when are they going to learn it? So give them the legacy of talking about money so they can carry it forward with them in their lives.
Yeah, I think again, very, very well said. So, and I think the consistency part of it is also so important. And I think that helps too if you're a parent and you're maybe not as comfortable with the money topic yourself. That helps encourage you to just go ahead and start, even if you feel like you don't have all the answers or you don't know where to begin or how to approach it. But if you're going to be consistent, you'll figure those things out, right? Whether you have to do some research on your own and then you talk to your kids, and some of it always with kids, right, is you also have to always be sort of watching and assessing where they are. Well, okay, I tried that approach last week and they're not ready for that. Okay, I've got to change it and modify it a little bit because this is where they're coming from, so that maybe I'll get through a little better, right? And that doesn't matter what it is you're trying to teach kids, right? So that's always an ongoing and evolving art as a parent, is how to best approach your kids with whatever it is you're trying to teach them or guide them.
Yeah, and can I just add one thing to that, Dominic? Ask them questions. Like we sometimes when we're teaching, we forget that they have a perspective. So asking them questions like, what do you think about money? How would you spend $100? What is so like kids, they can ask questions. So I just think that just know that you can meet them where they are, but you can also ask them for their perspective too. They have them, especially now. These children today have a lot of
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah. No, great advice. Yeah, that's a really good point. I really like that. So, where can people get a hold of you if someone wants to reach out?
Yeah, so the easiest way is, well, one, check out my website is ReneeBaker.com, and that has all access to how to connect with me on social. It has more information about the podcast and even the business of what we're doing. So yeah, definitely check me out on ReneeBaker.com. And I'm also very active on social, especially like LinkedIn. So check me out there. But I think you can find me at those places, and anywhere money is being talked about, that's where I want to be.
Okay.
especially for kids.
Yeah, great. I will put those in the show notes. And I follow you on LinkedIn, and you post good stuff on there. So anyone who's on LinkedIn and wants to follow Renee, I highly recommend that. So Renee, thank you so much. I think it's been a really great conversation with lots of really good, useful insights for the listeners. So I really appreciate you coming on the show.
And thank you, Dominic. Thank you for having me. And thank you for all of the great work you're doing. This is so important. So keep going. We need you. And your work is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the FI for Kids podcast. Please support the show by hitting subscribe and receive new episodes every Thursday. The intro and exit music this episode are courtesy of Douglas Cameron. As always, you can find links to the FI for Kids music in the show notes. Thanks again, and we'll talk next week.
Like the horizon, I can't reach you, you're so far away. And if I run to the place I want you to stay, you'd be gone. I'd be left wondering why you moved on, and why you never said goodbye. I can't wait any longer. I see the writing on the wall. It's time for us to say, tomorrow we are yesterday. Tomorrow we are yesterday. You're like the sunset. You're glowing bright, but you're fading. And what I don't get is why I'm left here waiting. But I'm like a phoenix. I will rise up from this fire. It's something we can't fix. I guess it's time for us to retire. I can't